Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Shadows of the Lost. Episode 4. Chapter 20. Kiera. The next morning, despite waking up early thanks to a certain something that I did love poking me, I didn't move. Although I needed a good shower, I wanted to be here when Catalia woke up. Goddess, this man! I pouted when he throbbed against me, his hand that rested on my hip already making my stomach all fluttery. It traveled up my waist before he squeezed my breast, making my eyes fly open, and I swatted it away, turning my head to look into his eyes and give him a small frown. Catalia was here. The strands of his black hair were falling over his eyes. I reached behind, brushing it back and letting my hands run down the side of his head where his hair was kept short, enjoying the feeling beneath my fingers. "Morning, amor mio," he murmured huskily, his morning voice making my stomach knot. "Morning," I replied softly, closing my eyes when his lips met mine, igniting the sparks of pleasure within me. I could never get enough of this. We broke away, both of us breathing hard, trying to control the emotions that enveloped us. "She slept all right," he remarked quietly, his arm wrapping around my waist tightly. I nodded, looking down at my little angel. I know there are going to be days she'll wake up traumatized by this. I just need to make sure I am always close. "She's a strong one." "She is," I whispered. Her eyelids fluttered open. Alejandro propped himself up on his elbow behind me. Her eyes met mine and they flew wide open as a huge smile crossed her face. "Mama! You're awake." "I am, baby girl." I smiled softly, hugging her tightly. She giggled happily. "I'm so happy, Mama." "So am I, Angel." I kissed her. "We are all together again." She nodded before I sat up, hugging her tightly. "How did I get here in your room?" she asked, confusion clear on her cute little face, looking around my bedroom. "I brought you here. I thought it would be a nice surprise when you woke up and see that I'm awake too." I smiled, brushing her hair back. She nodded happily. "I am very happy, Mama." She agreed, turning to her father. "Morning." "Morning, Daddy." Suddenly her smile vanished, and she began to look around the bed frantically. "Where is it?" "Where's what, baby?" I asked, concerned. "My cloth." I frowned, seeing her jump away as she frantically searched the bed. I glanced at Alejandro, concerned, noticing he was frowning deep in thought. "It's in your bedroom. Come on, we'll go get it," Alejandro said quietly. She didn't wait, sliding off the bed and rushing to the door. What on earth was going on? Alejandro ran his hand through his hair, getting out of bed. "What is she looking for?" I asked, standing up. "A piece of torn fabric," he said quietly, despite the look of seriousness on his face. He left the room, leaving me concerned and confused as I followed them out. 2 hours had passed since then. After Catalia had found her little torn fabric, she had calmed down. Alejandro quickly told me about the cloth before we all got dressed for the day and had breakfast. The kids decided to play in the mansion garden whilst Alejandro and I had returned to our bedroom to talk. Despite the protection spells and guards, we were still being very careful. Alejandro had now filled me in on everything properly. "Enrique, how he had helped Kot, what happened when he came after me, and ended with Kat's medical report. I stared down at the file, biting into my bottom lip as I tried to control my emotions. Whilst I was sitting at home, she had been subjected to so much. I closed the file, dropped it onto the bed and placed my head in my hands. My hair curtained my face before Alejandro wrapped his arms around me tightly. We remained silent, simply holding each other in silent comfort. We needed to question Catalia. I really didn't want to upset her, but it was something we were going to have to do. Even if we got someone to do a spell to probe her mind, it wouldn't work. She was completely immune to magic. "Shall I go get her?" Alejandro asked. "No, let's get some ice cream and some treats out in the garden. We'll ask her when the time feels right. She's been through a lot, and Enrique, he's a child for goddess's sake. Kot isn't wrong, we need to get him away from that monster." Alejandro nodded despite the frown on his face. "Yeah, although I wouldn't trust him to be completely innocent. If he's been drilled with bile since childhood, then he may not be someone we can trust." "Alejandro, he's a child who may also be a killing machine, one who may be a risk. But we can't leave him to suffer. We also can't just remove him. He may have other family who clearly don't seem to care about him." Kot said he was beaten for helping her. I shook my head. I don't know how people could be so twisted and treat children like this. "I know, but he's the child of the enemy. We will need to tread carefully," he replied with finality. I stood up, letting out a breath of frustration. I understood his point, but I also couldn't allow a child to be treated like that and do nothing. I wish I remembered something that could give us some answers. I wonder if the only reason Catalia remembers stuff is either because they wanted her dead or they didn't realize magic doesn't work on her. That's assuming that they did use magic or whatever that Jin uses." He added coldly, frustration and anger clear in his voice. "I'm assuming it could have been the second, but who knows?" I sighed, standing up, fixing the strap of my sage green dress and feeling his intense gaze on me. I walked to the door, but before I could open it, he was behind me in a flash, his arm shooting out, bracing his hand on the door as he looked down at me. I made the mistake to look up, only for my blue-rimmed green eyes to meet his piercing dark ones. My heart skipped a beat and I knew that the conversation from last night was not over. "We aren't done," he replied huskily. I crossed my arms, turning to face him. "He may be the Leaken King, but I am still the one who has the power to affect him strongly." Pressing my back against the door, I tilted my head upwards to him. You disobeyed me, amor mio." "I'm still annoyed." "I know, but I'm not a baby, Alejandro." My instincts led me and I followed. I did find her and you saved her. We work better as a team. I'm your queen. I'm one of the strongest fighters in this pack. I'm capable of being on the front line." I reasoned softly, placing my hand on the crisp fabric of his white shirt. "I never said you weren't capable, but it meant you put yourself in danger." He closed the remaining gap between us, his hand still on the door beside my head. I knew he was angry, and unless I apologized for acting like any mother would have, he would snap, but I wasn't sure I'd mind that. "I don't regret going after her. Maybe I did do it in the wrong way, but I wouldn't change it." I pouted slightly, fiddling with the button of his shirt. I can't apologize for doing what I felt was the right thing to do. So, you're going to act stubborn? He frowned, his eyes flashing. Maybe. I snaked my arms around his neck, pressing my body against his. Al, listen to me, I know I worried you, but I truly was losing my mind sitting at home. Forgive me. I whispered coquettishly. I almost lost you. I sighed, he was not buying it. Please understand me, Alejandro. You risk your life for us all the time, this wasn't any different. I explained softly. It's different. He growled, gripping my hips as he yanked me against him, making me gasp as rivets of pleasure rushed through me. Oh? How? I challenged, raising an arched brow. He narrowed his eyes, one hand wrapping around my neck. Because your life is worth more. He growled, his anger flaring. It was my turn to frown at him, he was wrong. My eyes burned brilliant purple as I glared up at him now. How can you even say that? You mean the world to me. Do you think we can just carry on if something was to happen to you? I worry every time you have to leave, I'm scared of losing you too, but I deal with it. We are equal, Alejandro, you can't be selfish to put a higher value on me over your own worth. I've lived far longer than you, and if I had to choose between you or myself, I'd choose you every time. His hold on my neck tightened, his eyes blazing as they flickered to my lips. Oh, forsake. That means nothing, because I choose you and my children over myself. I'd do anything for the lot of you. I shot back. We never agree on this, and it annoyed me. He quirked an eyebrow, licking his lips, trailing his gaze over me slowly. You're stubborn, amor mio. Too stubborn, it's infuriating, but it's also hot. My breath hitched when he pressed himself against me, feeling the hard shaft in his pants. I won't apologize for going after her, but I'm sorry for worrying you. I pouted, hoping he'd let it go. The moment he was about to frown, I wrapped my hand around his wrist that still held my neck. Then how about I make it up to you in another way? I murmured suggestively, now running my hands down his abs and sliding my fingers into his pants. My man, one who I knew thousands of women wanted, but he was mine alone. An arrogant smirk crossed his lips, but just as he was about to speak, I grabbed his hard shaft over his pants, cutting off whatever he had been about to say, his eyes flashing red. Amor, he growled. So, tell me. How about you vent all your anger out on me senseless? I whispered, tiptoeing as I kissed his lips ever so lightly. His hand tightened around my throat, sending another spark of pleasure to my core. You don't want me to stuck you right now, because you won't be able to walk when I'm done. Try me. I challenged, my entire body rippling with anticipation. I wanted him, needed him, and there was just something so incredible about the way that Alejandro stuck me. His lips crashed against mine in a rough, hungry kiss. His other hand yanking my dress up, exposing me, delivering a sharp tap to it, making me moan wantonly as I kissed him back with equal passion and desire. Oh, that's it. This felt so good, and I knew when he was done, I'd be littered with marks. Promise not to disobey me again. He growled, I can't promise that. I murmured. You're so stubborn. Not that you mind it. I whispered, our lips crashing against one another's once more. Our hands moved fast, with a desire and need that could never be satiated. I could never have enough. He left me desperately wanting more, every single time. He reached behind me, locking the door before turning me. I want to taste you. I whimpered, not sure if that's punishment enough. He growled, unless this pretty throat is ready to take it all. Yes, I want it. I want it all. Yes, baby, my mouth. I'll take it like a good girl. I whined hornily, unable to stop myself from begging. I wanted him. He didn't reply. He placed me down in the shower and turned it on. I watched him, admiring every angle of his body. Goddess, I could never stop admiring him, it's like it was the first I was seeing him. I tilted my head, frowning. The first time I was seeing him, how did we first meet anyway? My heart thumped as he began to soap my body as I stood there frozen. Why couldn't I remember? I racked my brain trying to remember the oldest memory of Alejandro I had, but nothing. I was drawing a hazy blank. There were no memories of our first kiss, our first conversation. What on earth was going on? Ever since the shower, Kiera seemed suddenly quieter. I had let out all my emotions, with everything I had and enjoying every moment, but then I don't know what happened. We were okay up until we showered. She had selected a high-neck white dress to cover all the marks I had left on her neck and had pulled her wet hair into a messy bun, but I could tell she was completely preoccupied. We had headed downstairs and entered the kitchen as she began to take the ice cream stuff out. You okay? I asked, trying not to look at her in that dress. She looked over her shoulder at me, a natural pout on those plump lips of hers that looked a tad sore, and she gave me a smile, nodding. Yeah, there's something bothering her. Babe, could you grab me a tray? Which cabinet? I'll get it, Luna. Claire said as she entered the kitchen with a tray of glasses and an empty jug. My eyes didn't leave Kiera's as she gathered several things onto the tray before she picked it up and smiled as her eyes met mine. Shall we? I held the door open for her, kissing her lips as she passed me before we both walked to the garden. Questioning caught. I don't think I'd ever be ready for something like this, and I've questioned adults and kids countless times in my life. The twins were on the swings, whilst the Westwood Devil was hanging upside down in one of the trees, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes staring blankly ahead and a creepy-as smile on her face whilst Dante sat on the bench with Scarlett and Elijah. Scarlett glanced up when we approached, a smirk crossing her lips as she looked at her daughter knowingly, whilst I walked over to the swings smoothly. Catalia looked a little distracted, and once again I saw that same piece of fabric in her hands. Daddy, push me? Skyla asked. I obliged, pushing both girls slowly. Faster, Daddy, we aren't scared. Skyla complained. I got ice cream, kids. Kiera called. I'm a bat. I can't come down. Azura whispered. I glanced at her and she smiled, looking even creepier than before. Kiera smiled back at her. Okay, then tell me what you want, and I'll put it on your cone or in a bowl for you. A cone will do for a bat. Azura replied. You are so weird. Dante remarked. That's no way to speak to your aunt. Azura retorted, glaring at her nephew. You are not my aunt. Am2, pup. She retorted. Dante glared at her with pure irritation. Azura, behave, Elijah warned. I didn't say anything wrong, she remarked, shrugging. She sure had good balance. Skyla jumped off the swing, rushing over to Kiera, and I looked down at Kot. So, what do you want? Ice cream in a cone or bowl, and which flavor? She shook her head. I don't want any, thank you, she replied, shaking her head. I frowned and gave a small nod. Why not? She simply shook her head but didn't answer. That was a first for her, not sharing what was on her mind. I glanced up, exchanging a look of concern with Kiera, who was passing everyone ice cream, before she began topping a new cone up. Azura, come down now if you want ice cream, you are going to feel sick like that, Scarlet called. Azura pouted before she jumped down. I wouldn't be sick, she mumbled before going to the table and taking her cone. What's on your mind, Angel? I asked Kot, pushing her sandy brown hair off her face, crouching down by the swing. She looked at me with sadness in her eyes. Please help him, Daddy, she begged softly, her eyes filling with tears. I sighed heavily, she was really hung up on this. But what exactly had she seen or experienced? That was something we didn't know yet. I glanced at the cloth, that had been a part of his clothes, something that belonged to him. His name was Enrique, right? She nodded just as Kiera came over, passing Catalia the cone of ice cream, her thick thighs coming into view, and I won't deny that I took a moment to appreciate how good she looked. Yes, Enrique Ignacio Escarra, the future alpha of the Fuego de Ceniza pack. She stated it carefully, as if she had repeated it and memorized it thoroughly with effort until she had burned it into her memory. Kiera and I exchanged looks. This was more than I was expecting. We had a name and a pack. What did he look like? Kiera asked, crouching down next to me as she cupped Catalia's hand, brought the ice cream cone towards her own mouth and took a lick. He had dark curly hair and very pretty green eyes, with yellow in them, and long lashes. Wasn't that a tad too many details about his eyes? I frowned, and Kiera placed a hand on my thigh knowingly. What about the horrible alpha? Kiera probed gently. Her face instantly fell, fear filling her eyes, and Kiera wrapped her hands over her small ones. He was scary, his face was burned, and it was all red and looked painful. He was horrible, Daddy. She looked at us, clearly terrified. He can never hurt you again, my angel. Kiera frowned, her eyes flashing purple. He was mean and said I wasn't good enough, that I'm better off dead, and that you wouldn't come for me, Daddy, because I'm not Dante. She broke into tears. I took the cone from her loose grip as Kiera wrapped her arms around her tightly. So, she had wanted Dante. Oh baby, he's just a horrible person. You, Dante, and Skyla, you are all equal to us. Kiera whispered, soothingly caressing her hair. I frowned, pondering over what she said. Darien, see what you can find on an Enrique Ignacio Escarra and a Fuego de Ceniza pack, right now. On it, Alpha. His swift reply came. Hi. I stood up, Didn't that stand for ash fire or some shit? With the name and pack, we could even find the boy. Kiera's voice came. Or better the father. Alejandro. What do you plan to do? Her voice was full of concern. If this boy is his heir, then I'm sure he's worth something. I felt her shock through the bond, but I think it was high time this man had a taste of his own medicine. I crouched down next to Catalia again. Do you want me to take that so I can use it to find him? I asked her. She frowned slightly, staring at her piece of cloth. Alejandro, we are not kidnapping children. Kiera's stunned voice came in my head. I looked into her gorgeous eyes which were wide with shock and disapproval. Yet. You aren't. But I am. Promise you will protect him, Daddy? Catalia asked me, her eyes filling with fresh tears. I'll make sure his father doesn't find him, I said as she finally let go of the piece of fabric. Perfect. I stood up feeling Kiera's gaze still on me. I walked towards the house, needing to do some of my own research. It's not like I was going to beat his pup how he beat my pup. There was a difference. One, I heard the sound of her heels as she grabbed my arm, stopping me just when I was halfway through the house. Al. You can't possibly be thinking of kidnapping him. She whispered, shocked, clearly not wanting anyone to hear her. I'll do what I need to. Alejandro, we weren't going to agree on this, I knew that much. Look, amor mio. I realized that I was far too soft and relaxed to start with. I let myself fall into failure. Over the years I've clearly let things go. It almost lost Catalia and she went through more than she ever should have. Dante is cursed and Skyla won't ever forget this either. It's high time I remembered I'm the Lycan King and there are things I need to do, regardless of if they are the right thing to do, but rather that needs to be done. My voice was cold, and it held a finality that I was not going to change my mind. Letting my alpha aura roll off me, it didn't affect her as much as others, but I wanted her to get my point. Alejandro, you can't say that. You have done so much, you need to stop blaming yourself for this, but kidnapping a child? You will ask Rehana to do this, won't you? Whoever I ask is my decision, I'm not going to change my mind. Our gaze met and I could see the hurt in her eyes. Can't you just see if he's safe or just try to find his father and port? Don't kidnap a child. If you want to help him it's different, but your intentions? She asked pleadingly. Yet, we all know an entire army can't port. Secondly, with the Jinn I'm sure it's not that easy. A summoning spell is the only way. Two wrongs don't make a right. She whispered, cupping my face. I gripped her wrists, inhaling her scent. No, they don't, but sometimes we need to get the answers we need. I replied, removing her hands from my face. It hurt, doing that, but I wasn't going to change my mind. There's a way to do things, baby. She pleaded desperately. I caressed her face, pulling her into my arms. She was far too pure to ever agree. This time we just weren't going to. I know, but sometimes we have to choose the hard path. That he touched my family. So he's going to pay. My eyes were burning red and when she looked up, I felt a wave of guilt wash through me. She sighed in defeat, resting her head against my chest for a moment. Alejandro, listen to me, I don't want you to get angry, but I think there's something. Amor mio, I'm not going to change my mind. I pulled her close, kissing her plush lips deeply and ending the conversation. I'm going to get that pup and I would hold him as bait, and if the he behind this didn't care about the pup, I'll put him somewhere safe. Alejandro, listen, I'm going to go meet Darien, I'll be back later. Once she looked down, but simply nodded in defeat. I love you, I said quietly, taking hold of her chin and tilting her face up. I love you too, she whispered. I frowned, quite surprised that she was actually near tears over this. Neither of us exchanged any more words before I left the house, heading towards the pack headquarters. I hated when I disagreed with her over anything. I entered the building and followed my nose until I found Darien and Dustin, one of my 2 deltas in one of the tech rooms. Having 2 deltas really helped, knowing that there were more commanders to take control when needed. Alpha, Dustin said, lowering his head as Darien looked up from the computer he was working at. Right on time, Al, I think we found something, he remarked seriously. I moved my brow. Already? You gave us a pack and a name, I don't think that was information this guy planned on letting out, Darien remarked, pushing his seat out. It's not much, but there's a pack in Puerto Rico with that exact name. The Caribbean, I tilted my head. I don't get what debt I have to pay to someone from so far out, yet, but it could be a century-old debt or something like that. You never know, it doesn't need to be directly you. Dustin added thoughtfully. Anything on the name? The Escaras. There's a wealthy family who own a load of stuff in the States, but they are private people, I'm not sure if it's the same, and nothing on an Enrique Ignacio Escara. Darien said, scratching his short beard thoughtfully. We'll relay what we learned to Janina. They were from the States, they might know something. There's also Alpha Kenneth of the Shadow Wolves pack. His mates from the States, see if you can organize a meeting with them. That pack, Darien raised an eyebrow. Yeah, okay, the guy was a Ken doll and spoke like he was the King of England with an accent and mannerisms of the royal family. Let's just say he and I did not go well at one table. Yeah. I'm sure his woman's from Florida, I frowned. Darien smirked slightly. Well, I better get on a call to Buckingham Palace then. He joked, with a mock accent. I gave him a small smirk as I turned away, shoving my hands into my pockets as I pondered on this new information. Dustin. Also, there are the old archives of packs from around the world, I doubt we'll have them all or even if they are up to date. But if our family have crossed paths with his family, then maybe there's something in the old archives, the ones that were originally from the Black Storm pack. Yeah, I think some may still be there. Not all of them were brought here. I'll contact Rayhan myself. I needed to check out how Del was coping too. I left the room, taking my phone out as I walked to my office, unlocking the door with my fingerprint. The lights came on automatically when I entered and walked over to my desk, dropping to my seat as I video called Rayhan. Taking out a cigarette, I lit it as I waited for him to answer. Moments later, he answered the call, clearly having just stepped out of the shower, wearing nothing but some jeans and a towel in hand. Eager to answer my call, I remarked, taking a drag on my cigarette as he sat down on his bed. You wish, but I did think it may be important. He replied, toweling his hair. Did he keep his hair so long for? The amount of care that needed, made no sense. So how's Spitfire doing? I asked. He looked at the screen, and I didn't miss the anguish that flickered in his eyes before he masked it, looking off to the side. Handling well, but she's exhausted. It's draining her. He replied. I felt guilty. I really needed to sort this out as soon as possible. Is she awake? He nodded, and for a moment I was looking at the luxurious ceilings of the Rossi mansion, or the palace if you wanted to call it that. Kitten. I got you. His quiet words came along with a whimper and a whisper. I'm okay. The camera was back on them, and I looked at Dulsanra, who, like Dante, was covered in those veins. Her skin looked almost as white as her hair, and her blue eyes looked pale. Hey, Spitfire, still holding up? Obviously. She replied, giving me a small smile as she leaned against Rayhan's chest, his arm around her tightly as he cradled her in his lap. Good to hear. We got a pack name and his son's name. The pack originates from Puerto Rico and it's called the Fuego de Ceniza pack. The Alpha family are called the Escaras. Rayhan frowned, running his fingers through his wet locks. Doesn't sound familiar, yet, I know. Just check the old archives of packs that we do know of. See if you can bring them down. I'll do that. Mom wanted to speak to you, but she's been holding off knowing you're busy. Could you give her a call when you have a moment? I will. I gave a curt nod, looking at Del once more. We will get this sorted. How are the pups? Both are doing great. Lola and Rose have taken them for the day, Rayhan replied, kissing Dulsanra's lips, referring to his beta couple. I could tell from the way she could barely keep her head up that she was suffering more than Dante. I think we need to regroup. Can Lola hold down your pack if you five come down here? It might just be easier to deal with stuff if we're together. Those words sounded cheesy. That annoying smirk of his crossed his lips, but before he could speak, I spoke up. Don't go getting ideas, but the pups might just be a little more occupied if they're together. Yet, Lola and Rose had a pup, but still, there were 4 here. I think that would be nice, Dulsanra added, smiling gently. I knew Rayhana had cast spells around their pack, but still being in one place may help. Well, you can ask Mom what she thinks, too. I nodded. I knew Scarlett and Elijah would need to also go back at some point. Liam was working on this case, and although Raven and Damon covered for him, they had 6 pups between them. I'm going to call her now, I said before ending the call and scrolling to Maria's number. She answered soon after, seemingly in the kitchen. A place Maria didn't often go. How did anyone manage to get you into the kitchen? She smiled slightly, raising an eyebrow. Hello to you too, Alejandro, and no one at all. It's my personal choice. I was making Dulsanra some of her favorite dishes. There isn't much I can do for her, she said as she began to slice some peppers. Ah, makes sense. So that pretty son of yours said you wanted to call. You know I'd always have time for you. You should call if you want to. She smiled and nodded. I know you do, but still, I know you are busy. I rang Kiera to ask how you were all doing. She looked down at the chopping board, and I took a moment to look her over in her long-sleeved high-neck deep green dress. I could tell she was as skinny as ever. She was getting thinner every time I saw her. I knew the signs of someone losing it all once their mate was gone, and she was getting there. Slowly but surely. I wish I could tell her to take a chosen mate, although it hurt to even think of that. I know she was Raphael's mate, but I also know he wouldn't want her to lose herself over him. About that, I was thinking you and the kids should come down for a bit. Think you all could use the change of space and Rayhan's beta can hold down the fort there for a bit. I was thinking to ask Rayhana too. I think it would be ideal for everyone. I smoked my cigarette waiting for her answer. She nodded her head slowly. That's going to be a lot of children in one place. She replied with a smile. Yeah, well, seems like everyone around is having kids. Besides, they prove for good distraction or entertainment. I replied, smirking before I frowned. Maria was quite smart and had studied abroad for a few years. That is true. Mari. Ever heard of a Fogo de Ceniza pack? She frowned, tapping her chin. No, not that I recall. Why? It's most likely the pack behind all this is from. If I remember anything, I'll let you know. She mused thoughtfully. I nodded and sat up. Well, I'll let you go, I need to get some sorted. I'll be expecting you and the kids soon. She gave me a nod. Of course. I ended the call and sat back, just as Darien mind-linked me. I've made an appointment with Alpha Kenneth, 3 days from now. Good luck. He's expecting accommodations. Ever heard of suggesting a video call? He said sometimes discussions are better in person, and he has desired to talk to you in person for a while now. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. He was such a prick. Did you tell him I desire to kick him in the balls? Darien's snicker came through the link, and I ran my hand down my face. Yeah, well, give them one of the villas, make sure security is in place. Did he say how long he'll be around? 2 days and nights. I hope he had answers, or I was just putting up with him for no reason. Kiera, it was later in the evening and Alejandro had told me about the alpha of the Shadow Wolves pack coming down in 3 days' time. I had been about to tell him something earlier, but he had cut me off, and now I couldn't even remember what it was. What was it? Something told me it had been important. I shook my head to clear my mind as I looked at the grocery list that Claire had prepared. Maria, Rayhan, Del, and the kids would be coming tomorrow, including Rayhana and Chris, so it was going to be a full house. I was looking forward to it, knowing the merriment of more of our family together would help everyone. Perfect, I think you have everything covered. I commented, glancing over at Claire. Even after a long day her white hair was in perfect position, all neatly tucked up into a bun. The desserts for when the alpha of the Shadow Wolves pack comes are still undecided, Luna. Let's go for Victoria sponge, creme brulee, and of course trifle. I turned as Azura walked into the room, a few stray leaves stuck in her hair. Oh, yummy! I smiled. Can we get a chocolate gâteau too? She added, looking up at me as she strode over to us, hands locked behind her back. I chuckled, picking out the dried leaves from her hair. Of course, we can. Madame Azura Rain, now tell me, why does my little sister have leaves in her hair? Oh, I was climbing on the roof and I fell into the tree. Concern flooded me. As much as I knew these children were tough as cookies, it still worried me. You need to be careful, Azura. Don't worry, Dad and Alejandro were nearby, and Dad caught me. I smiled in amusement, removing the last of the leaves. Well, since you are here, is there anything you fancy for tomorrow's dinner? She tilted her head. Let's make sure Dante's and Kat's favorites are on the menu, she said with a nod. And what of yours? I asked. Well, me and Sky are okay without, we just want them to get better soon, she furrowed her brow and I stroked her head. You are such a sweetie, Zuzu. I whispered, hugging her tightly. Oh goddess, please don't call me that. I'm not a baby anymore. She groaned. You still call Liam, William. I smiled, tugging her cheek. I do, but it's cute. She shrugged. Just like you, I replied with an amused smile. I wondered who she got her hair from. Neither Mom nor Dad had dark hair. Odd. I shook my head at the random thought, turning back to the list and adding a few more items to it. I'll add the desserts and their favorites down, Luna, Claire reassured me. I nodded before motioning to Azura to follow me back to the lounge. It's nice to see my two girls hanging, Dad said. I smiled at him as Azura ran over and hugged him. He kissed her forehead, giving her a small smirk. Of course, we hang out often, Daddy, you just never pay attention to it, you're busy looking at Mama. She stated, sitting down next to him. Oh really? I can multitask pretty well. Mind games won't work on me. Who's playing mind games? She asked innocently. Dad motioned me over and I smiled, walking over and taking the seat on his other side. He wrapped his arm around me, kissing my forehead gently. I leant my head on his shoulder, a strong wave of nostalgia washing over me. I glanced around the room. Dante was lying down, his head on Mom's lap, fast asleep. Kat was watching TV with Sky, but she looked lost in thought as she leaned against Alejandro, who was sitting on the floor next to them. His eyes met mine and I smiled at him, wondering what he was thinking. You look beautiful, amor mio, he said through the link. Thanks. I replied, crossing my legs smoothly and giving him a good view of my thigh. The ache between my legs had faded earlier, and I was ready for another round all over again. I was satisfied when his gaze fell on my legs. I hid my smirk, leaning my head on Dad's shoulder whilst giving my man a good view. Keep teasing, and I'm taking you out of here right now. His eyes met mine, and my core nodded in pleasure. It sounds tempting. What time is Maria getting here tomorrow? Mom asked, bringing us both out of our conversation. Afternoon, Alejandro replied, his arms around Catalia, who fiddled with the hem of her dress. How is Dulsanra doing? Dad asked. Not as good as Dante, Alejandro replied quietly, making my heart thunder. What? I saw her earlier on video call. He said, his eyes met mine, and I knew he could feel my guilt. Goddess! Don't blame yourself, Mom said quietly. Things will get fixed, Dad added, confidently glancing at Azura, who was listening with enrapt attention. Bis, she gave us a cute smile, and I chuckled. Goddess, you are such a little minx. I teased. You know, I was thinking in the kitchen, who does Zuzu look like? Her hair is so dark compared to the rest of us, it's just like how grandma's used to be. Dad tensed and looked at me, confusion and shock clear in his eyes. I raised my eyebrows, realizing the tension that had fallen on the room. I glanced at Mom, who looked slightly pale. What did I say? Azura tilted her head. That's true. Liam's hair is like Mama's real hair, Kiara's is like Daddy's, then whose is mine like? Amor mio. I glanced at Alejandro, who was frowning with concern. Like Grandma Jessica's, Mom said with a smile. Like, look at Skyla's eyes. They aren't like her mom or dad's. I nodded. Yeah, her eyes are a lot greener than ours, I replied, glancing at Mom. Azura nodded in agreement before she got up and hurried over to Skyla. Let's watch something different. Amor mio, that question was a bit odd, don't you think? Alejandro's voice came through the link. What do you mean? It wasn't odd, I was wondering where Azura got her dark hair from. He looked at me but didn't say anything more. Strange. I glanced at Mom and Dad, who were clearly conversing through the mind link. Did I say something wrong? I was about to ask Alejandro when Claire mind-linked me. Luna, dinner is ready, I will feed Dante whilst the rest of you can eat at the table. Okay, thank you, Claire. Dinner's ready, I said out loud. Are you okay, Kiara? Dad asked when we stood up. I smiled warmly and nodded. Of course. He gave a small nod, yet I didn't miss the concern in his eyes. Night had fallen, and I had just gotten the kids to bed. Alejandro had gone out to deal with some stuff and had returned when Catalia had asked for her cloth back for bedtime. She had begun to get very worked up without it. Alejandro had given it despite feeling quite concerned about her getting so attached to it. She's only a child, baby. I reasoned, as I let my hair down. The bathroom door was open. I know she is, but her being a little too attached to another pup is not healthy. I chuckled. Are you worried she's crushing on him? I teased, squeezing some toothpaste onto the brush, and began brushing my teeth. Kind of. He almost growled, making me giggle. There's nothing wrong with it if she is. I replied, finishing off and adjusting the strap to my burgundy silk nightdress. I stepped out of the bathroom, my gaze instantly falling to Alejandro. He had just stripped and was holding a pair of sweatpants, wearing nothing but his black boxers. Goddess, this man was utterly fine. I walked over to him, wrapping my arms around his from behind, my hand cupping his bulge and making my core throb. Amor, he placed his hand over mine, and when I felt him throb, I moved my hand away, resting it on his chiseled abdomen. You need to stop being so worried about Catalia's concern with this little boy, remember, he helped her escape and gave her food. You know how loving she is. I murmured, kissing his upper back. He turned his head, looking down at me. Maybe. What was that about Azura's hair color earlier? He asked. I raised an eyebrow. You're asking me? Even Mom and Dad got weird about it. I replied amused. He unhooked my arms from around him and turned around, cupping my face. Amor mio. You know she looks just like Indigo. Why would you even ask that? Auntie? That's true, she does now that you mention it. I was just wondering because she doesn't look like Mom or Dad. His heart was racing, and I could feel a sliver of worry through the bond. Kiera, why? I mean, who is Azura's biological mother? It was as if he had just slapped me. What does that even mean? Of course, Mom is. Was he insinuating that Dad had an affair or something? Confusion flitted through me, and my head felt heavy, and with it, my irritation grew. What are you trying to say? Kiera, you're worrying me. Indigo is Azura's biological mother. What? Alejandro, I remember Mom pregnant, I remember her birth, it was hazy. I placed a hand to my head, confusion and fear settling into me. The child was transferred into Scarlet when Indigo was killed, remember? I looked up at him. I knew he was telling the truth thanks to my ability of being able to sense if a person is lying or not, but… No. I don't remember. No. I don't remember. Her words rang in my head as she stared up at me, fear clear in her gorgeous eyes. I won't lie that my own heart was pounding as I pulled her into my arms, inhaling her intoxicating scent of hazelnut chocolate. I held her close, trying to control my own storm of emotions. Doesn't remember. What did that even mean? How could she forget that Azura was not Scarlet and Elijah's biological daughter? That was not something small. Alejandro, is something wrong? She asked. I knew she'll be able to tell if I'm lying. Don't worry too much, let's head to bed. I need to leave early but I should be back by tomorrow evening. I said quietly. You didn't answer the question. She replied, her heart thundering as she pulled away from Amor mio. Things will be okay, maybe it's just a side effect of him making you forget whatever happened when you went to the country house. I replied, trying to figure this out. I don't want to forget important things. She whispered, her hand on my chest. You won't? I replied. Taking hold of her wrist, I kissed her knuckles softly. You won't? I could hear the conviction in my voice as I reassured her, but the fear that I may be wrong was beginning to eat up at me inside. The cut along her head came back to me and I knew something was really wrong. She nodded, despite her thumping heart still racing. Let's get to bed. I said quietly, cupping her face. I kissed her hard. Deep down a niggling thought came to me, that what if? What if she forgot me? Just the thought of that happening made me pull her close, crushing her body against mine as I kissed her harder. An hour later, she had fallen asleep in my arms, yet I couldn't sleep. I was a mess of worry. I needed her to be okay. Maybe I was overthinking it, maybe nothing like that was going to happen, and maybe I just needed to chill out. I slowly untangled my arms from around the gorgeous bombshell in my arms and got out of bed slowly, pulling on my discarded boxers and sweatpants. Grabbing my lighter and a cigarette packet, I left the room. I needed to talk to Elijah. Even if I smelled of X, I didn't really care. Meet me on the back patio. I mind-linked him. Despite being able to mind-link other alphas, it still gave me a slight headache. Moments later, Elijah stepped out, and I smirked, not missing the hickeys around his neck that peeped out from his t-shirt. His wet hair fell in his eyes. It seemed like I wasn't the only one who had just head-linked. He frowned and I knew he probably could smell the X off me. "What do you want that couldn't wait until you had showered?" he growled. I smirked at him, lighting my cigarette. "What's wrong? Does it still annoy you off knowing I just with your girl?" I taunted. Despite being in no mood to mock him, I couldn't help it. Sometimes just came out. His eyes flashed a cobalt blue, and I rolled my own. "Seriously, are you still doing this 9 years on? I'm sure I've stuck her more times than I can even count. What do you want? Did you call me out here for this?" he growled murderously. I smirked humorlessly. "Actually, no," my smirk faded and I looked at him seriously. "You know about earlier? When she asked about Azura. I asked her and I ran my hand through my hair, staring up at the cloudy night sky. "And?" he asked, his anger dissipating, replaced with seriousness. "She couldn't remember anything more than you and Scarlet being her parents." "Indigo. What happened?" "Nothing," I said, the fear settling into the pit of my stomach again. His heartbeat quickened and he looked pale. "But Rayhana checked her. She wasn't cursed. No, she wasn't. But they did something. She's forgotten some parts of her past. I'm guessing it's when they made her forget whatever happened in there. But I'm just a tad worried that she may begin to forget more." I swallowed hard, trying not to think of the worst-case scenario. "She won't forget you," he replied quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder before removing it incredibly fast. I smirked before glancing at him. "I hope not, because she's my lifeline," I said quietly. "She was. Without her I would lose my mind." Our eyes met and he looked at the sky, shoving his hands into the pockets of his pants. "I know, but I'm sure she's fine. Get Rayhana to check her over tomorrow," he said quietly. I nodded. "Yeah, I really needed to. Don't you often feel like the moon goddess does not want to leave us in peace?" I asked, sitting down on the steps and taking a drag on my cigarette. "5" he sighed heavily. "Yeah." He walked off and I heard the door open and shut behind him, leaving me alone in the garden. I stared up at the sky wondering what was to come. Something told me that Catalia's kidnapping had just been the start of all this. I ran my hand through my hair when I heard the door reopen and Elijah stepped out again. He sat down, leaving a meter gap between us, and placed down a case of 6 beers. "Sometimes a drink helps," he said, taking a can out and opening it with one hand before passing it to me. "Yeah, guess you're right. The only problem is 100 of these don't help." I sighed, taking a gulp as he opened another can for himself. "Yeah, true." We fell silent again, just sitting there in silence, drinking the beer. The smell of the fresh earth and grass mixed with the cool breeze was refreshing. The promise of approaching rain clung in the air. I tossed my cigarette stub onto the ground and took another one out. "Want one?" I asked, holding out the packet. "Why not?" He shrugged, taking one and placing it between his lips. I smirked. Now that was a first. I took the lighter out, lighting it for him before lighting a second for myself. I'm guessing Scarlet would blow if she knew I got you hooked. I won't get hooked, besides she won't know unless you snitch. He remarked, taking a drag on his cigarette. Is she with the girls again? Yeah, and Clara is currently with Dante. I'll be going back though. He remarked. I appreciate you two being here, but with Liam working overtime you would need to go back. I blew out the smoke, slowly staring out at the swaying short grass. We'll go back when we need to, right now they have it covered, but if what you're saying about Kiera is true, I don't want to leave yet. He replied quietly. I didn't reply. Kiera. I really hope she was going to be okay. We sat there silently going through 3 cans of beer each, making small jokes, or in my case annoying out of him, but when the first drops of rain began to fall, we decided to head inside. Sometimes you just need that moment to sit back with someone who gets you. It was the following day and I tried not to think about what she had said about Azura. It was maybe just a one-off and she was going to be completely fine. Elijah said he'd let Scarlet know to keep an eye on her whilst the both of us were out. The day flew by, research after research got us nowhere. It was now late afternoon and I really hoped Kenneth had some answers in 2 days' time because I had nothing. Alpha, hi witch, Janina is on the phone. Drake, my other Delta, held the phone out to me. Is it weird that I just realized that both my Delta's names and my Betas started with a D? Maybe that's why they were all D** at times. Alpha. He snapped my attention out of my thoughts, and I gave him a scathing glare, taking the offered phone from him. Yeah. Hello to you, King Alejandro. We can skip pleasantries. This woman was antagonizing. Well, I have checked on our side, there is nothing that we have discovered that linked Andorra to the Fogo de Ceniza pack, so you can rest assured that it isn't something she has done. It may be something from the Rossi side, perhaps from your father's past. I frowned. So for once, Andorra was not behind this. Then again, I couldn't rule her out entirely. She had messed up for us more than once. How sure can you be? Very sure, I would not have called you if I wasn't. However, if anything happened after she was mated to your father, then I cannot speak for her. I am speaking of what she did before she found him. We looked into her parents' pack and everything else, but there is nothing. Whatever this Alpha wants, it's not because of Andorra, I can assure you of that. Her voice was firm and cold, like always. Fine. Thanks for looking into it. If you do find anything else, let me know. I will. We will continue to look into any way to locate the Jinn, but currently, I don't think we will find a solution. It will be extremely difficult, and I fear that it is something you will have to figure out yourself. Yeah. I guess so. I hung up, rubbing my jaw as I frowned. The silence in my room was loud. My current plan of action was to find the pup, see if he comes for him. In that time, question the kid and grill him for any information possible, then find the one behind it, meaning his father, and somehow get everything undone. A sudden thought occurred to me, I looked down at the phone and rang Janina back. Hello. One more thing. Does killing a jinn undo his magic? I asked. Silence ensued, but I didn't miss the small intake of breath. King Alejandro. You may be a leakin, but you are treading an extremely dangerous path of thought. To kill a jinn means suffering the consequences. There is always a price to pay to kill an immortal. You didn't answer my question. Will killing him undo the curse? She huffed with irritation. Yes, because jinns are immortal, as long as they live, their magic is intact. If they are killed, then yes, with it all their magic unravels too. She replied in a clipped tone. I sat back in my chair, placing my legs on the table, crossing my legs at my ankles. Then you know my next question, right? How do you kill a jinn? How do you kill one? I repeated, my voice cold and emotionless, yet laced with authority that she dared not defy, even if she wasn't a werewolf. I do not know. I didn't know if I should believe her or not. Then how about you try to find out? It could cost you your life. She replied quietly. Something told me she knew more than she was letting on. Well, I'll be waiting for the answer. I'm sure you wouldn't care what happens to me. Not at all, but you are also vital for the balance. Her clipped voice came. I don't plan to die. Get me the answers I want, or I'll get them myself. This involves your niece too, remember. Although she didn't go around stating it, Janina was Dulsanra's paternal aunt. She is your family and I'm sure you will find a solution. She replied dismissively. Yeah, I will, with or without you. So just do as I'm asking, all I need is the answer, I'll do the rest. Very well. She said reluctantly, after a moment of silence. If anything happens to you, I will not be responsible to answer to your queen. It won't come to that. I hung up, my brows furrowed deeply. Killing the alpha behind this was not going to be enough, I knew that I needed to kill the jinn too. I threaded my hands together, dropping my legs to the ground and leaning forward. How to kill a jinn? I wouldn't just rely on Janina to find that answer, I'll look for my own too. I returned home when night had fallen, whilst Elijah instantly pulled Scarlet aside, kissing her like he had been away for years. Well, I was just being a hypocrite because when I found my mate, I planned to kiss her until she begged for air. She had mind-linked earlier to ask if I'll be back by dinner and I told her we would. The house was a storm of sound, but one that I didn't really hate. I could hear the girls laughing and shouting in excitement, whilst Aaron and Tatum were fighting over a toy. Sienna was toddling along, trying to escape from the room. While Dulsanra lay on the sofa with a blanket over her, Rayhana was sitting next to her, using her magic to make Sienna do a 180-degree turn. The poor kid looked confused as she kept her balance, blinking those dark grey doe eyes of hers as she realized she was no longer facing the door. Why did kids look so deceiving? They were not innocent. Kiera was trying to soothe the boys, looking smoking hot in that tiny dress of hers. Her sandy brown hair cascaded over her shoulder as she broke up the fight. Tatum ran off with the toy whilst Aaron glared after him angrily. Maria was braiding Skyla's hair, Azura and Catalia had similar braids in their hair as they ran circles around Maria and Skyla. Who's annoying you? I asked Sienna, picking her up as all eyes turned to me. Kiera stood up, coming over as Sienna looked near tears. Yet, she was at that stage where she got tearful if I picked her up. Uncle? Hey! Rayhana gave a small wave. Hey! I pulled Kiera close, kissing her lips hard. I missed her. I tried not to pay attention to how good her body felt pressed against mine and those tits. Let's just say I'll be admiring them later. You look divine. I murmured, slowly kissing her neck over her mate mark. Satisfied with the soft sigh that escaped her, I let go of her and she took Sienna from me just as she burst into tears. Pups! Rayhana stood up and I walked over to her, giving her a tight hug. She was a decent height and with those heels she was nearly 6 feet. What happened? Did you empty the entire pot of glitter on your face or some shit? I asked, looking at her bronzed face. She rolled her eyes. Oh uncle, are you jealous that I look so fine? She stated, clearly she was not bothered about what I had just said. Well, I'm afraid if I kiss you, I'm going to have that crap all over me. I mocked, placing a kiss on top of her black locks. You always do look more than fine, princess. Her mate, Chris, remarked upon entering the room. These two were made for each other. If their pup was half as conceited as them, then I felt sorry for his mate. Well, the moment they began sucking eating each other's faces off, I walked over to Dulsanra. Her eyes were open but she looked exhausted. Hey, King Burrito! She whispered. Hey, Spitfire! I crouched down by the sofa, placing a hand around the back of her head. I kissed her forehead. Her pale eyes met mine and I silently promised that she was going to be okay. Where's pretty boy? Rayhan? Dante wanted to talk to him. She sounded amused and I frowned slightly, nodding. Guess the cousins are bonding. She gave a weak nod and I stood up, going over to Maria, who stood up. She looked a bit better than she did on video call. I didn't say anything, hugging her tightly. Every time I saw her, I remembered RAF. No matter how long went by, I couldn't forget him or get over his loss. I had lost many in life, but I just dealt with that. But RAF, there was something entirely different about losing him. You didn't get over it, you just learned to deal with it. I let go of her and she smiled slightly. It's good to have you here, I said before turning to the girls. Nice hair. Thank you, Daddy. Catalia replied, her eyes bore into mine. I knew she wanted to ask me if I had done anything about finding the pup. Even if I brought him here, I did not plan on allowing her to meet him. I glanced at Rayhana. That was a spell we were going to do later. One I knew Kiera was not going to approve of. I'm going to go change, I informed Kiera, leaving the room. Don't take long, dinner will be ready soon. She replied, as I gave her a quick kiss and a nod. I had smoked countless cigarettes and needed a shower. I headed upstairs, taking 2 at a time, slowing down when I heard the sound of Rayhan and Dante talking. Rayhan, we had gotten here a short while ago and I had come up to check on Dante. It was weird not seeing him downstairs, annoying of me as he talked to Dulsanra and complimenting her on how she looked. I would tolerate all of that happily if they could just both be okay again. I reached his bedroom and knocked lightly on the open door. One of Uncle's most trusted guards was sitting on the sofa in his room. He stood up, lowering his head to me before he left the room, leaving us alone. Ray, Dante said, frowning slightly as he sat up. His aura filled the room, and I knew that when he did shift, he was going to be truly strong. Hey, kiddo. I replied, walking over and ruffling his hair. He raised an eyebrow, pushing my hand away weakly. Don't touch the hair, he warned, trying his best to sound like his usual self. He looked like hell, but it was clear he was coping better than Dulsanra was. Mind if I sit? I asked, motioning to the edge of the bed. He shook his head and I sat down looking at him. He had some music playing in the background, but it was faint, and apart from that there didn't seem to be anything that he had to keep himself occupied. How's Dulsanra? He asked, a small pout on his lips. I raised an eyebrow. I'm surprised you weren't downstairs to greet her, considering you are usually always the first at the door. I smiled slightly. What's wrong? Not up to it or just don't want to see her anymore? I asked lightly. He frowned, his eyes flashing with irritation. Don't say I don't want to see her, I do. I just... He glared at me, crossing his arms as he sat up straighter. He stared down at the striped bedding, and I could sense his uncertainty. What's up? I asked, leaning forward, running my fingers through my long hair. Do you hate me? He murmured hesitantly, shocking me, looking up at me with those ruby red eyes of his. Why would I hate you? I questioned, confused. I heard Uncle silently come up the stairs, but I knew Dante hadn't sensed his father yet. Because of what happened to Dulsanra, because of me. I'm always a nuisance to you, right? He asked nonchalantly, despite the fact that I could tell this was weighing on his mind. Seeing your mate like that. It hurt, it tore me up inside and I wished that I could take away that pain, wish that it was me in her place. I'd give anything to see her happy, smiling, and laughing, yet I couldn't do anything but watch her go through this with nothing I could do and feeling absolutely useless. It was killing me, but was I going to blame a child? No. He wasn't even conscious when Kiara called us over. If it was anyone else, maybe I would have been annoyed that Dulsanra risked herself, but Dante was a kid. He was 8, and no matter how irritating the asshat could be, I loved him. Want the truth? I asked him. He swallowed and nodded with defiance. Obviously. Now that's more like the kid I knew. I don't hate you, but I am annoyed at you, for even thinking that I could hate you. Am I that bad? I raised an eyebrow, and I almost smiled as I saw the flicker of relief in his eyes. Sorry, he looked down, clenching his fists. You and my kitten are going to be okay, because you are both fighters. I said quietly, reaching over I gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. I'm glad you asked me, but seriously, I can't hate you. He nodded, giving me a small smirk. Yeah, and I guess Dulsanra can never hate me either. I raised an eyebrow, this. Uncle's voice came and we both turned to see him standing there, arms crossed. I was thinking more along the lines of asshat, I remarked with an amused smile. Does the job? Uncle remarked coldly, coming over and taking a seat next to Dante, placing an arm around his shoulders. Right, yeah, I guess us Rossies suit the name. Right, Dad. He replied. Like father, like son. I smiled slightly, remembering my own father. To be the alpha son and mate he'd want me to be. Was I making him proud? I could feel Uncle's sharp eyes on me, but I didn't look at him, keeping my mask in place. Yeah, we do, especially you two. Uncle said mockingly. Or more like you three. The three sons of three brothers. I just wished we could have a strong bond, something I doubted would ever happen with the hatred that Leo felt towards me. Right, I'm off to shower, think dinner is almost done too. Uncle said standing up. He slapped my back before he left us alone once more. Dante pushed the bedding off and got up. I could tell it took a lot out of him. Need help? No, I'm just going to go get ready too. I smirked. Okay, Dante was still perfectly able. If he was ready to get all dressed up, then he was definitely doing okay. For whom, may I ask? Who do you think? He replied arrogantly, giving me an annoying smirk, before sauntering off the best he could despite his exhaustion. I chuckled, lightly shaking my head. They were both definitely going to be all right. Kiara dinner had been pleasant, it felt nice to have a full house, and for fleeting moments we were able to forget the weight of everything going on around us. I healed Dulsanra, and although it did nothing to the curse, it did give her a little energy, another reason I was glad they were here. I had just tucked the girls into the bed. Rayhana was making Tatum and Aaron sleep and the rest of the adults were downstairs. Mom was making hot drinks for us all whilst I made sure Dante was settled. He never used to want me to put him to bed, but he didn't argue over it since the turn of events. I ran my hand through Dante's hair, kissing his forehead gently as I poured my healing into him, but it did nothing for him. I sighed heavily, looking at my sleeping baby boy and fought back my tears. You are going to get better. I wish there was more that I could do for him, for Dulsanra. My phone beeped. I picked it up from the bedside drawer and smiled, seeing it was a message from Raven. I unlocked my phone and clicked on it. Call me if you have a moment. It read, followed by a purple and black heart emoji. I hit the call button and she answered almost instantly. Hey Kia, how are you? Hey hun, I'm okay. Just getting by I guess. How are the kitties? They are all fine, I just got them to bed and thought I'd call. How are you and the family today? I smiled. Having 5 toddlers to handle was no small feat. We are all doing okay. We have some answers. I'm not sure if Liam's told you, but Cod had a name and a pack name, so we are getting somewhere. I'm glad. No, Liam didn't mention that. He should be coming back tomorrow. I'm thinking of you. You know, if there's anything you need me to do, I'm here, or if you just need to vent. I knew she was. Liam was currently at the burnt-down country home trying to scavenge for any hint or anything that could help. You two are already doing so much, I mean you have the kids and the pack. Mom and Dad have been here, Liam's not home. I can handle the kids with ease. Besides, I do have help, but they do miss Zuzu. She's the ringleader and without her, I think they do feel it. I'm just hoping things are sorted soon. Her tone was softer towards the end, her worry and concern for us clear in her voice. I'm sure it will be. I replied. Thank you, Raven, for everything. Nothing to thank me for, that's what I'm here for. We ended the call shortly after, and I smiled down at the phone. She was such a good friend, goddess. I'm grateful that she came into my life. I tilted my head, I couldn't remember how we became friends. Did we become friends after she was mated to my brother? Or did I know her from before? I brushed my hair back, frowning. Pondering over this for a moment, I shook my head and stood up, being extremely careful not to disturb Dante, and silently left the room, heading back downstairs. The sound of my heels echoed in the silence. My mind wandered to what Alejandro was planning on doing. I didn't agree with it, but I also knew he was not going to listen. I turned the corner when suddenly someone grabbed my elbow, spinning me around and straight into their strong arms. I smiled as the intense sparks coursed through me, his intoxicating scent hitting me hard. I closed my eyes for a moment, enjoying it as I wrapped my arms around his neck. I looked up at him slowly, my heart thumping. His body molded against mine oh so perfectly. "Can I help you, my love?" I asked, kissing his neck. We had been fine during dinner and everything, but that disagreement between us still remained, and I just felt recently we were having far too many of them. He didn't reply for a moment, his cold eyes staring down at me. "Do I need a reason to hold you?" I bit my lip as his hand traveled down my back. "Not at all," I replied, feeling giddy. "Good." And then his lips were on mine, one hand tangling in my hair as he yanked my head back and kissed me roughly. We broke apart after a few moments, the intensity of the kiss leaving me lightheaded. "You know, if you two are done, the drinks are getting cola." Rayhana's voice came from the living room. I heard a light chuckle, and I blushed, realizing the door was open. "Babe, you can just keep the drinks hot." Chris's drawl came. "That's not hard for a smoking hot bombshell." I pulled away and Alejandro wrapped his arm around my waist as we both entered the living room. Rayhan was seated in the corner with Dulsanra in his lap, a blanket over her shoulders as he cradled her body, running his fingers through her hair. Maria was next to them carrying little Sienna, who was the only one awake from the kids, with Mom on the other end of the sofa, her leg draped over Dad's. Chris and Rayhana were on the other sofa, their arms around one another. Alejandro took a seat in the armchair, and I picked up the remaining 2 mugs, which were steaming hot, something I knew was courtesy of Rayhana and her magic. I walked over to Alejandro, and he pulled me slowly into his lap before taking his mug. With the kids all in bed it was a lot quieter, even Sienna was falling asleep in her grandmother's arms. I took a sip of my hot chocolate while resting my head on Alejandro's shoulder as Mom and Maria made small talk. When silence fell, Chris spoke up. "So, when are you planning on doing that spell?" he asked, his eyes fixed on Rayhana. She looked at Alejandro, and I looked up at him, hoping he'd reconsider. "Soon, let me just finish this drink," Alejandro replied, glancing at me for a split moment. I sat up straight, looking at Mom and Dad. Everyone in this room knew the plan. "Do you guys actually agree with this?" I asked, keeping my gaze on Dad. "He isn't planning to torture the child," Dad said quietly. I pursed my lips. "But it's a child. Who is in a bad position?" This may be better for him, Kiera. Mom reasoned quietly. Okay, even she was okay with this. I looked at my acrylic nude nails and then up at Rehana and Maria. Am I the only one who isn't okay with this? Is it a feeling you have, or you just generally don't think it's right? Rehan asked, raising an eyebrow. I generally don't think this is right. I murmured, gripping my mug tightly. Tulsanro looked at me too, and I realized that we did need answers. She and Dante couldn't carry on like this, but I did wish this wasn't the way to go about it. Sometimes a decision isn't easy, but we have to get it done. Maria sighed softly. Where do you plan to keep the child? In a room, safe. Alejandro's reply was curt and cold. You mean as a prisoner? If he's a little older than Dante, say 9 or 10 even then, that means he'll remember this. I debated. Look, I don't want to bring this up, but sometimes we think we do the right thing, but it can have lasting consequences. We've seen it happen before. I glanced at Rehan, who frowned looking down. But I wouldn't have done anything any differently, even if I could go back. He replied, his eyes flashing green. Tulsanra placed a hand on his cheek, soothing him. I didn't say anything else, I was outnumbered on this one. The urge to tell them to carry on and that I would not be a part of this was on the tip of my lips, but if they were going to bring a child here, then I wanted to reassure him that he was going to be okay. That we were not going to hurt him. I remained silent after that. Getting up from Alejandro's lap, I placed my mug down, but I didn't return to his side. I was trying to control the emotions that were whirling around inside of me. Amor mio. I glanced at him, trying to mask my emotions as I picked up the tray of empty mugs. I'm just going to put these in the kitchen. I turned away feeling upset. I heard Rehana follow me out, but she didn't speak until we entered the kitchen. Kiera, I'm sorry. She said, coming over as I placed the mugs in the sink and began washing them. You don't think there's anything wrong with it, so why are you apologizing? I questioned quietly. Because I know I'm upsetting you by doing this, but we aren't going to hurt the boy. He may be better in our care. There's a difference between being in our care and using him as bait, but I know we won't agree, so let's forget it. When are you doing the spell? I asked, my irritation seeping into my voice. She crossed her arms and shook her head. I don't get why you are making this sentimental, Kiera. As a mother, I don't think it's right. This involves our loved ones, it's not so easy to make these decisions. Can we just end the conversation? I replied, my eyes flashing. Rehana frowned. Fine, we won't discuss it then. I really don't think you should be there when the spell happens if you are just going to get hurt over it. This is war. That monster has resigned Dulsanra to the state she is currently in and she's in pain, as well as Dante. I think getting back at him is perfectly fine. She replied, her own eyes blazing. Exactly. That monster is responsible, not his son. Not a child who helped Catalia. Even if he didn't help her, we shouldn't be targeting him. I shot back, girls. Calm down. Maria's voice came. We both turned to see our mothers standing there. Rehana was only 2 years younger than I am, and I don't think we've ever argued before. Kiera, I think it's better if you head to bed, Mom said quietly. I clenched my jaw, feeling my aura surge around me as I tried to control my emotions. No, I'm coming along because this is a child who clearly has no one on his side. I growled and I didn't wait for an answer, brushing past both elder women, knocking straight into Chris in the hall. He didn't say anything as he steadied me by the elbows, a frown of concern on his face. I walked back to the lounge and crossed my arms, looking at Alejandro. My eyes icy. Let's get to this spell. Where do you plan to do it? Alejandro stood up, frowning. At headquarters. Secondly, I'd appreciate it if you stay here. I'm going to be there, I replied firmly, my eyes flashing. You ain't. Elijah, make sure she stays here. His aura rolled off him in waves and I could feel the command in it. Alejandro strode over to me, his power and dominance rolling off him in waves. He reached for my face, but I stepped out of his hold. I shook my head, not masking my utter disappointment. I could never get my head around using a child for any purpose. It was wrong. I hope you're happy, I whispered before I turned and was about to leave the room, only for Alejandro to grab my arm and yank me into his arms. Sparks rushed through me and my chest squeezed painfully. Let go of me, I commanded through the link, not wanting to cause a scene with Dad right there. He frowned, but did as I said. I knew he could see the fire in my eyes. I hope that in time you see that I did the right thing, he replied. I didn't answer. Running upstairs and walking down the hall, I entered the girl's bedroom, messaging Mom that I'll sleep here tonight. I did not want to see him. My phone beeped, and I looked down at Dad's message. Kiera, can we talk? No, I'm going to bed, I text back, tossing my phone onto the small sofa in the girl's room and running my fingers through my hair. I walked to the window and stared out into the night sky. I saw Alejandro, Reina, Chris, and Mom head out, and clenched my jaw feeling helpless. This was wrong. This child was going to feel as if he was a prisoner. He was a child, not a monster. I closed my eyes, leaning against the wall, turning away from the window. Goddess protect all our children. I hated hurting her, but she was stubborn. I would listen to her too, but I needed to do what was best for me and my family. If that meant taking this pup, then so be it. Scarlett wasn't meant to come, but I knew she came to make sure the child was okay, probably to reassure her daughter. The silence was deafening. Reina was frowning, and I knew her disagreement with Kiera in the kitchen was playing on her mind. As much as I loved others to get at each other's throats, when it came to two women I loved, it wasn't as fun. Kiera is right in one aspect of what she said, Scarlett stated, falling in step with me. I didn't bother looking at her. I got her point, but I needed to do this. Yet? Well, if you don't want to be here, don't, I replied coldly. I didn't say that, don't twist my words, she growled, her eyes flashing silver. Alpha female. I'm not. I'm just not in the mood to hear when I know I have to make some decisions that aren't easy. I shot back, my voice harsh and cold, but I didn't really care. I hated it when Kiera was angry at me. I get that. Just remember, He is a child. She replied quietly. We didn't speak until we entered the pack headquarters and went up to my office. Babe, can you clear the floor? Rayhana asked Chris, who gave her a nod and moved the chairs back whilst I pushed my table aside. I'll set some barriers just in case when we pull him through, they try to locate him. I don't know how strong they will be, but I'll try. Is doing this on pack territory wise? Chris asked, glancing out the window. It's safest, since the grounds have been spelled too. I replied as Rayhana opened the bag Chris had been holding that contained her supplies and she began to draw symbols onto the ground with one of her jars of ash. I never got this mojo, or how it worked, but it sure was useful to have at hand. Scarlet stood there, arms crossed, a frown on her face as she watched her intently. Auntie Red, if you keep staring, I can't focus, Rayhana remarked. Don't mind me. Scarlet replied with a small smirk, but she did turn her back on Rayhana and instead turned her attention to me. Where are you keeping him? I'm not answering to you. I replied, leaning against my desk and taking out a cigarette. Uncle, no smoking, I don't need anything messing with the spell. Rayhana warned and I pocketed it. Today was not my day. Kiara. I called through the link, but she had put her block up. I frowned deeply, taking my phone out of my pocket instead. The urge to message her was strong but I needed to do it in person. I shoved it back into my pocket just as Chris spoke. If this kid is raised to be anything like his father, he may not give us the answers we need, then what's the plan? He asked. Then I'll have to probe his mind. Rayhana replied, taking the cloth I had taken from Katalia before she went to bed. I'm not risking you doing that. If the jinn had anything in place, I don't want you hurt. He remarked, but despite his level tone, his smirk that was always on his face was now gone. I'll be fine. No. I'm fine with you doing this stuff, but I do not want you risking yourself. We can all see the state Dell's in. Chris replied firmly. You're right, we won't risk like that. Especially since he seems to be careful. I added. Rayhana nodded in defeat as she lit the candles and stood up, fanning her face for a moment before she took a deep breath. Okay, I'm doing this. If anything feels odd, just break the circle. Chris walked over to her, pulling her close and kissing her lips. She locked her arms around his neck and kissed him back. They exchanged something through the link and she nodded slightly, smiling, whilst he held her chin for a moment before moving back. Scarlet stepped forward, and I saw her pointed stiletto an inch from the edge of the circle, ready to break it if needed. Rayhana's powers surged around us, her eyes burning bright, her dark thick hair defying gravity as it floated around her as she started chanting the spell. I could feel the intensity of the spell as she whispered his name. A portal would open, then I was going to reach in and pull the pup through. I'm guessing there would be guards around him. We couldn't leave a note in case it was used in a similar manner to get back to us, so if a guard was there, I was ready to pass a message if need be. Soon a shimmery transparent wall appeared, and I readied for the moment. Chris had his eyes on Rayhana, his eyes shimmering the pale gold of his wolf, ready to protect her if the need arose. My gaze snapped to the room that now appeared just on the other side of that translucent veil. My frown deepened as I took in the dark room. Thick velvet curtains covered the windows. But save from that, the room was almost empty, with only a rectangular wooden box in the center of the room, which had a boy lying on top of it, without a blanket or pillow. Was this really his son? It didn't seem like the room for the son of an alpha. Did Catalia get it wrong? Rayhana and Scarlet exchanged looks, and I stepped forward, knowing I had to be fast. I jumped in, but before I even reached the boy, his eyes flew open. He was about to jump up, but I was faster, claiming a hand over his mouth and lifting him up. I was back through the veil. Rayhana whispered something and the portal slammed shut. She broke the circle at the same time as Chris and Scarlet did. Everyone knew how risky that had been. Rayhana stumbled and Chris caught her, scooping her up bridal style and carrying her to the two-seater near the window. We didn't know how far out they had been located or how much it would take out of her, and by the looks of it, it had taken a lot. All eyes now turned to the pup in my arms, and I knew he was indeed an alpha pup. He looked older than he probably was. Maybe he was about 10 or 11. His dark hair fell across his forehead, but the hatred in those hazel eyes of his looked far too much for a pup. Calm down and I will let you go. I spoke quietly, yet my alpha aura rolled off me. His eyes burned with anger, and he didn't obey. It was then that I realized he only had one hand that was clawing at my arm. His other arm, that had been covered by the sleeve of his long black shirt, now peeped out, and it looked like something had recently happened to it. All I could see was that it looked like his hand had been sliced off. I released his mouth, feeling a sliver of guilt go through me when I saw the bruises that covered his neck and jaw. So, the Leakin decided to kidnap me. You made a mistake. There is nothing you do that can make Padre bend to your will. He spat coldly, his eyes glaring into mine. His voice was cold and accented. It confirmed we had the correct pack. I'm sure this kid was from Puerto Rico. When he held my gaze, I was doing my best to control my alpha aura, but even then he was forced to look away after a moment. Enrique, isn't it? Scarlet asked, placing a hand on my arm. She tried to move me away. We exchanged glares before I stepped back and crossed my arms, taking the time to scrutinize the boy before me. His hair was slightly wavy, with a square jaw, high cheekbones, and a strong straight nose. He had a few small faded scars across his jaw and one on his lip that never healed properly. Another two were along his forehead and across his left eyebrow, leaving a small gap where the hair would never regrow. His arched brows were furrowed together. The only thing soft on the boy's face was perhaps his eyes, deep hazel green rimmed with dark black and those flecks of yellow with thick lashes, but even then, there was still a hardness in them. We aren't going to hurt you, Scarlet continued, placing her hands on her thighs as she bent over to look him in the eye as he looked down. I don't think she realizes he's her height, midget. I smirk at that. The boy simply turned away from her. Okay, look pup, it's your choice, we do it the easy way or the hard way. I said coldly. You should speak before he follows up on that. Chris added quietly as he crouched next to Rayhana, who had her head on his shoulder, clearly drained. Do your worst, came his fearless reply. Scarlet frowned at me, standing straight. We do apologize for nothing. Your father took my daughter and hurt her. He attacked my mate and has a grudge against me. When I have tried to reach out to him to deal with this man-to-man, he refuses, so I had to stoop to his level. Or almost, because unlike him, I'm not a loser. Clearly, he beats you too. Padre punishes me when I disobey him. Do not try to manipulate his teachings into anything more. His face was emotionless as he stared ahead. His voice was cold and empty. I frowned. Didn't he realize he was already manipulated? I shook my head at his words. So, the more recent bruises on you, are these the results of disobeying him by freeing Catalia? I asked quietly, my alpha command rolling off me. Answer me. I saw the dimples in his cheeks twitch as he tried not to answer, gritting his teeth, but his head bowed in submission within seconds. Yes. Rayhana's breath hitched, clearly shocked. Scarlet ran her hand through her hair and Chris was frowning in concern. I wasn't going to deny that I wanted to beat the out of this pup's father. I placed my hand on his shoulder and crouched down before him. Thank you, I said quietly, surprising even myself. For giving her food and for helping her. His face didn't change, but I saw the haunted look in his eyes as he glanced down at his right arm. It wasn't worth it, he replied blankly. I swallowed hard, staring at his arm. A sickening thought came to me, but I pushed it away. No, that wasn't possible. It's late, you can go to bed, for now, we will talk in the morning. I stated before mind-linking two of my men to come and take him to the room that was set up for him. It was down near the cells, but it would be in one of the lesser interrogation rooms. I had asked them to put a more comfortable bed in there, some books, a laptop with no internet, but giving him access to some movies, as well as a mini fridge with snacks. I know I was still holding him hostage, but I couldn't trust him. He didn't reply, simply turning his back on me. There was a knock on the door and I told my men to enter, thinking I needed to get Kiera to take a look at his injuries tomorrow. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.